Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Coding with Omar. In this introductory episode, I will be talking a little bit about one of the most important data structures that you will run into in your coding career, and that is dictionaries. In JavaScript, they're known as objects. In Python, they're known as dictionaries. For most intents and purposes, you can just use them the same. So what is a dictionary? Maybe by now you're familiar with an array or a list, which is just a collection of items. Now, a dictionary is special because each one of those items has its own handle, or it has its own key, like a language dictionary, like an English Merriam-Webster's dictionary, for example. If you know the word that you're looking for, you can go directly to that word, because it's alphabetical order, and then you can look up the definition. So the key, which is in this case is the word, is combined with the value, which is the definition. So you can imagine that this can be really nice because let's say you want to, say you have a bunch of values, right? And then sometimes you're going to want to increase, sometimes you're going to want to access this value, another time you're going to want to update this value. Well, if you have it all in an array, it's going to be tough. You're going to have to know exactly which index this value is in versus which index this value is in, and it's going to be tough. So what a dictionary is really nice for is that you can just look it up. So if you say, I want to go to key X in this dictionary, then boom, then you immediately have access to this value, and you can get it, or you can update it, or this value could even be a function, and then you could run this function. As you get more and more into more complex coding problems, dictionaries or objects will be a very nice thing to know about. So in this video, I'm going to talk a lot about JavaScript objects, and then near the end, I'm going to focus a little bit more on Python dictionaries and kind of draw some compare and contrast between the two. I would say in this video, I talk mostly about keys. What are the best data types to store as keys? And you'll see pretty early on that those can be strings or that they can be numbers. There's also some syntactical considerations when you're looking at JavaScript versus Python, and that's also what I'm going to get into. So, hope you enjoy. Okay, so I want to break down succinctly and clearly the major differences between objects in JavaScript and dictionaries in Python. So to begin with, let's look at keys, okay? And we'll start with JavaScript first. So let's talk about what keys are allowed in a JavaScript object. And by the way, a key is the handle that you can identify an object. So every object in JavaScript looks like this. We'll call our object O. So it has something called a key and something called a value. So that later on, when you want to access it, we're going to say O, and we're going to get here key and value. And so if we have multiple keys, so we can say key 2, value 2. And then we can grab, it's like looking something up in a dictionary. Well, you want to look up the definition. If we use the English dictionary, for example, so you have the word, that's like your key, and you have the definition is the value. So we want to look up the value of key 2. So we can just type key 2 and then run it and see what we get. We get value 2. So this is a very efficient way for the computer to be able to store values and pull them out, as opposed to like an array. You can't really. The only way that you can access a value in an array is by knowing its index, or by doing some sort of function like find or something like that. So objects definitely come in handy, and in JavaScript, everything is an object of some type. Let's talk a little bit more about accessing objects in JavaScript. So we saw this one right here, O, and then in brackets you you type in the key. But here actually JSBin gives you a little hint. They say key 2 is better written in dot notation. So what is dot notation? Well, you go like this, O dot key 2. And you'll see that also prints out the same thing. So dot notation is like kind of a convenient way of writing it when your key happens to be a string. But it can get problematic if your key is not a string. So in JavaScript, keys can be any simple data type. And by simple, I mean string, number, boolean, null, and defined. Okay? So I'm gonna run through and I'm gonna put a key that's every one of these and give you an example. And then we'll see where the problems can arise. So just to start with, I'm gonna say here 3, right? 3, and we're gonna say 55. Okay? Oh yeah, and everything has to be separated with a comma. So if we say here O.3, I think the problem is gonna arise. So error. Yeah, it doesn't like that. Now, if we were to put, well, I don't know if we can put this. Let's try this. I don't think that doesn't work either, right? So, but what does work is use the bracket notation. And then that is going to evaluate 3 and everything is going to work well on that. So you just have to be careful. Most of the time you're going to do strings like this. So yeah, so let's start out by saying, let's do like names and ages. Okay, so Omar 27. Okay, Sam. So a key can either look like just written out like that, or it can be written like this, Sam 35. Okay, and then here we go, and we're going to evaluate. Again, we can do O.Omar, O.Sam, O of Omar, O Omar. See, there's many different ways of accessing it. Except you can't do this, right? Because it's going to look at that and it's going to say, it's going to imagine that there's a variable called Omar. Here it knows to look up a string, and here using dot notation also knows to look up a string called Omar. But if you use bracket notation, it's going to assume that there's some var called Omar somewhere, and that equals, for example, 3 or something like that, right? And if we do this, we're going to get undefined, because so it's going to look up, it's going to see, okay, where's the variable called Omar? Here it is, 3. It equals 3. Okay, so now I have to look up the key 3 in O, but there is no key 3 in O, so it's going to return undefined. So we'll see look how that happens. Undefined right here. Now, if we did have a key called 3, we would say whatever, hi, right? And then we run this, and then Omar, it'll look up Omar, which evaluates to 3, so it's going to look up 3, and it's going to return hi. Hi, there you go. Here's another interesting thing too. JavaScript, when it comes to keys that are numbers, it's pretty much going to convert it to a string before it does so, before it looks it up. So you think that, oh, this is different because 3 here is a string versus 3 being a number here, but what you'll see is that it's, oh, what the heck? I don't know why I did that. Oh, that's why. Yeah, see, I wasn't crazy. Okay, so hi is returned twice. So it looks at hi. Omar here is 3 as an integer, and then 3 here is a string, but in both cases it returns hi because this 3 is really getting converted to a string. But anyway, so let us continue on talking about different keys. Okay, here's another thing, okay? Now, what if I go in here and I type 3 like this as a string, and I say override? Let's see what's going to happen. So yes, it did override. This again gives you an example that number keys are treated the same as stringified numbers. Right? So what we saw here was that it overrid. Let me just run this again. It overrid the high when it called the 3, the int, and it called the 3 string. And the same thing would happen to if you called, for example, let's not call Omar anymore. Let's call Sam. Sam is old. Okay. Now let's see what happens here. Okay, so you see here instead of 35, it overrid Sam and said old. The last value assigned to a key will overwrite previous values. All right, now let's look at something else. Let's start a new object, and let's call it Q. Okay, and here I want to get into different types of primitive data types. This should be primitive and not simple. Okay, so we covered strings, we covered nums. Now let's cover these bool, null, and undefined. So bool, it can be true or false. True, true. This is true, and then false. All right, now let's go here and do q.true, q.false. Simple enough. It evaluates. It looks it up like that. But you'll also be able to do some interesting things. So for example, not true, which obviously is false. But you'll see here that it will in fact evaluate to false. And here, so you can actually put in some conditionals like 3 times 6 equals 12. Not so much, right? So it evaluated this, found it to be false. It looked up the key of false in object Q, and it returned that. Okay, so that's Booleans. Now let's look at nulls. Nulls and undefined. Whoops. Yes, Star Wars reference. Okay. You can pretty much guess what's going to be printed out here. Q.null and Q.undefined. All right. Now let's look at how this can be used usefully. So let's say we're looking for something in Q that doesn't exist. So like Q.foo, right? So let's see what happens here. So evaluates what, where, and why is that? Well, we're looking for Q.foo, which is undefined. Oh, well, there's no such thing as foo. There's no key in Q that's called foo. So it looks for Q.foo. It doesn't find it, so it returns undefined. And now we're passing that undefined key into Q, which is defined. I hope I'm not being very confusing, but there we go. Okay, now let's get into something that's going to be important when we're talking about Python. And that is assigning keys, assigning variables as keys. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Let's call a variable x. Let's call it turtle. Okay. Now let's say we want to have we want to create an object z. So var z equals. We want to have a key called turtle. So you might think that we could just be like, okay, well if x is turtle, then we could just say x here, and we can say my fave animal. Okay. And then maybe later on we can do console.log z of turtle. You see how that would work? But we're going to see here it's not going to work. It's going to return undefined. The reason is because when it comes to evaluating keys, JavaScript does not look to see if this is a JS reference. It doesn't look to see if it's a variable. It's going to treat x as a string. So the only way you could be able to call it is if you said .x, and it's going to return my favorite animal. Now, on the flip side, when you're inserting a value, JavaScript will look to see if it already is a variable. So we can say here on the flip side, we can say fave animal, and we'll say x. Now, when we do z.faveAnimal, it will return turtle. So it's stored this value, this variable, as the value for fave animal. This is just an important thing to keep in mind, because as we're going to look here in a second, and with Python, you actually can store variables as both different things. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is you cannot assign objects or arrays or variables, which I just mentioned the variables part, right? So we're not even going to mention that, but we'll say objects or arrays as keys. Okay. Var p equals. Let's try to do like an array right here. We'll say like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, true, and we try to run this. It's going to give an error. It doesn't. It's not going to work. Okay. And similarly, let's say we wanted to make like this z. Yeah. This is already. I mean, you can already tell here. It's a cluster of death. All right. But what you can do, you can make the value in another objects. So object 1, we'll call it this. Right. So object 1 is actually another. So there's an object inside our object, and then we can say object 2 true. Object 3 can be an array. I by 43. Okay, and this will be completely okay, and we can look up every one of these things. Okay, so here we go. So it's true, it's an array, and it's another object. So this all works out beautifully. All right. So taking these insights that we have here, let's look at Python, and we'll find that there's a lot of things that are similar, but there's also some key differences. Two of the big differences in Python is that num keys don't override string keys. And what I mean by this is 3 does not equal 3. Okay, so let's call our object O again. Scan the same curly brackets, and let's say 3 is high and 3 string is by. Now let's see what happens here. So you see, so Python is okay with this. Int, and that's okay. It doesn't override it. If you remember, when we tried to go by here, it did the same thing. It overrid it. So it's good to know. And here, so we don't use dot notation in Python, at least not in the core libraries of Python, or not without importing some library. O.3 is going to give an error. It doesn't work. What we can do, we have to use bracket notation. O of 3 is high, and making this a string will give us by, and that is cool. Now let's look at the other difference. Well, first I should, just to clarify, though, if you use the same data type, you will override it. Okay, so as you can see here, it just overrid it, just like in JavaScript. So don't make that mistake. Let's look at the other difference, which is that you can evaluate variables to the keys. Okay, so what I mean by is this. So you remember in JavaScript, remember this var turtle example, and we said that it didn't understand what was going on here. It couldn't set this key as turtle. Well, with Python, you're not going to have that problem. So we can say, let's just say fav animal equals owl. Okay. Now, if we go like this, fav animal, sorry, who, boom. So it automatically knows that we set this as fav animal, but it now knows it as owl. So when we do print O of fav animal, it's going to say does not compute. Oops. It doesn't know what that is. It doesn't know what fav animal is. However, if we give it owl, it does know who that is. Who? Because as far as this object is concerned, this key right here is called owl. It's not called fav animal, and that's kind of a nice thing. Now, let's just say we do mouse, and then we got mouse sound. Okay, in this case, so now we're doubling down on our variables. All right, and we could do I forgot to mention, but you can also go like this. Hey animal, and so O of hey animal is mouse sound, and it knows that mouse sound is squeak, so it printed out squeak. Okay, so those are That's the difference between Python dictionaries and JavaScript objects. As for all the other things, like we said, there's no dot notation in Python, and likewise, you can't put other objects or anything like that. Like, let's say if we created so right now what I'm doing is I'm creating another object, right? And I cannot set this object as a key. All right, it's going to stop right here and it's say unhashable type dict. So a dictionary, which is what this key is not hashable. I'm not going to get into that, but anyway, the point is that it cannot do that for a dictionary type. Now, if you want to make dictionary your value, that's perfect. That's perfectly acceptable. So we can just go like we can flip the script, right? And that's totally fine. See that? So this is interesting because now they're both pointing to the same thing. So I wasn't really expecting to talk about that, and I won't. I'm gonna skip right over it. Yeah. So pretty much what I've just been doing is kind of like showing you different ways of like playing around. I mean, you open up Python Tutor, right, and play around, and you'll discover all this stuff for yourself. Or JSBin, you'll discover all this stuff for yourself. All right, guys, that's it for this video about objects and dictionaries. I hope it was illustrative. I hope you found something informative or interesting that you can use in your future coding endeavors. Well, the two things that I would say just to close out is the best way to learn this stuff is just to practice it. Get in Python Tutor or get in JSBin and just play around with it. Just experiment with different types of keys, with different types of objects, with different ways of calling the ones or the other. As a bonus, try playing around with functions. Try setting a function as a value of a dictionary or an object, and then try calling that function directly by accessing the key of that dictionary. So see if you can do that. If you have any questions, as always, or suggestions and feedback for what you want to see me do a video on, post a comment. The next thing that I will say is that as a best practice, just keep your keys distinct. So I talked a lot in this video about how certain keys will overwrite other keys, but some of them won't. But just as a best practice, just make sure that your keys are distinct. That will lead to great coding successes. Till next time.